Hello and welcome to live postgame coverage of Florida State basketball. I'm your host, Ben Meyerson. We're presented by the FSView and Florida Flambeau today. I'm joined by staff writer for the FSView, Logan Grutchfield. You can expect these live streams for a number of Florida State games for the rest of the season. We're going to be doing next Wednesday's Miami game, so you can expect that after they finish up on Wednesday night. Welcome, Logan. Thanks for coming on. This is our third ever live stream. I really appreciate you coming on. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Especially after seeing another Florida State victory like we just saw, 79-72 over Pitt. Definitely pretty good. I was at baseball for a little bit earlier today. It was good to see a little bit of a better result there as opposed to, what we saw at baseball. So, I think that this is really, when you kind of get into the meat and potatoes of what you want out of a basketball season and what you're expecting at Florida State, games like this are, I think what you could come to expect. I mean, this was a big win for, I think, the depth specifically for FSU. I think we saw that in the second half. Pitt was just getting, I think, worn out, and then being able to rotate in 9 people who could probably start for a lot of Power 5 programs was a massive advantage for Florida State. So all in all, I mean, I don't know that it was as amazing of a win as we saw on Monday. But that was, and I know, Ben, you want to talk about that a little bit. So, but I mean, I don't know that there's too much that I could be very upset about after this game either.
Yeah, well, I think, if you want to be critical of this team, I think there are definitely some things you can pick apart from this game. Some things that I think will be really good for Leonard Hamilton when they sit down and look at the film and go over this game. There'll be some good examples of things they can fix, things they can work at, and things that they do want to get better at. And I think, when we look back, not just at this game, because I don't think we'll be looking back at this game a lot, but I think if you look at this recent 3-game stretch that Florida State has been on, the Wake Forest game to come back in overtime, Virginia, and now this game, it's 2 opponents where you expect Florida State to blow them out, and yet it's as close a game as that Virginia game probably should have been. And then Florida State goes and blows out the best team in the ACC, essentially. Virginia got close at times, but when Florida State was able to keep their distance, they really put their foot on the gas pedal against Virginia. But it's so funny to see how this team, and we were talking about this a little bit before our stream, kind of, they seem to, at least this season, be playing down to their competition a lot, especially recently. So, and I know I said I wanted to get into that. So let's get into that. What do you think about how this team is not only responding to the Virginia game, but they go on pause, they come back, and then they have, like I was saying just now, that huge Monday game. There's tons of energy. A lot of teams coming off that game would maybe have a trap game next, especially against a bad team or a team that isn't as highly considered as Pitt is. So what did you think about this team's response? And kind of, I know some Florida State fans may see that box score. They may watch that game and be slightly frustrated with this team, even though they won. But can you talk about, the response and the energy they still seem to have today after coming off that huge Monday win? Because, I think those Monday wins and those types of games can sometimes just throw a team off and maybe cause them to lose focus.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and especially with a win that had that much hype. I think after the Virginia game was like, oh wow, I think that game had just such a much bigger conversation around it, about pack line, how's FSU going to respond to that, blah 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 blah. And this one not as much. So I think that that kind of media explosion might have led to kind of an aberration. But overall, for me at least, looking at this win, I thought that it was fairly pretty usual for what you would expect out of an FSU win. Kind of good guys moving in and out. Kind of getting advantages there over Pitt, especially. I thought they did a pretty solid job guarding Justin Champagny, who, he's looking like he's probably going to be the ACC Player of the Year. And there was, when I was watching the broadcast, there was actually a pretty indicative comment, I thought, where one of the analysts, he was like, "Oh, FSU, they've got 8, 9 guys that are starter quality, but they don't really have any that are in that conversation." And maybe you could make a case that they should be, but they're not. It's not like Pitt or something where Champagne is kind of the vessel through which the offense moves. And I mean, they had a couple other guys play well, but besides their 3-point shooting today, I don't know that it was as dominant, obviously, as what we saw against Virginia. But I mean, overall, I don't know. I wouldn't call it playing down as much as I would say it wasn't like a huge off the charts thing like we saw against Virginia. And those are, obviously, we're getting into the final stretch of the season. Wins like that, if FSU could play like that every single game, would be ideal. But I think that this was a solid victory. You're not going to totally beat the brakes off every team that you play. And for me, just kind of looking at a macro level at the different spots in FSU's game, I think there's a little bit of sloppiness in the first half with some of those early turnovers, and I thought some of the foul calls were a little all over the place in this game, especially early. There were a few that I was kind of like, there was that one.
And Logan, we'll talk about the foul calls in a little bit. Trust me, I have that as a topic for us because that's something I definitely wanted to spend some time on. But something I wanted to talk about that I just heard you say, and just because I want to make sure I picked up on it a little, is, and I think I'm actually going to disagree with you slightly here. And while I think, there are some positives to take away from this game, I think that first half, that was what we saw in terms of, I think, Florida State playing down to their competition. Like you were just saying that, and I think that's what I more meant earlier when I was saying that, because they had so many sloppy turnovers. I feel like a lot of opportunities where they could have had better plays or had better chances to score, but they were settling a lot, to me, it seemed like, in that first half, and they weren't going through their entire offense. I think especially at the beginning of the second half, I think this team, they really with all the ball movement, they were really just comfortable with coming out of that second half, and just with how much energy they played with, because like we keep saying, they were coming off that huge Monday game, but then you don't want to play down to your opponent. I think I guess in that second half, while I was saying I disagree with you a little bit because I think they played down in that first half, that second half is where the energy and the pulse of this team just really stepped up. That's the type of team in the tournament that you want to see, or you don't want to see if you're another team, because they're not going to fall on their sword easy. They're not going to go down just at any moment. So and we can talk about let's talk about the foul calls here in a minute, but I just wanted to wrap that up by saying, I think at times in the first half, they did play down to their competition. I think that'd be fair. But at the same time, given that, I think I believe they only made 4 3-pointers the entire game, Florida State did. So when you take that into consideration, MJ Walker didn't have any points. I guess it's very impressive in that aspect to me, that so many of their staples and the things that you expect out of this Florida State team necessarily didn't go their way, but they kind of found that energy to bounce back.
I completely agree. And I think, that first half, we can agree, was not ideal in terms of, what we've seen. And also, I'd say this is, at times, I think FSU can be a little slow out of the gate in either half. Like what we saw against Virginia, that was where they kind of got, caught off guard a little bit, I think, by their point guard. And even at the beginning of the second half, I think FSU was a little slow. I mean, shooting wise, they were not. It took them a while to kind of get their, sea legs just to start the second half. But I think overall, for me, what I take away from that is the ability to make even just a minor course correction like that. That gives me some faith in, this team's ability to, do well down the stretch. Even if it's against a team like Pitt that they should win by 15 or more points, the ability to kind of figure that out, I think, is really good, especially if they're playing in the first round against a team like, what comes to mind is that 2019 game against Vermont, where they were really kind of slow out of the gate and were able to, get it back together. So I think that ability, what I take away from that is the ability to make a course correction like that is good for their hopes down the road from now.
I absolutely agree. And, I want to get a little bit into more of this game in a little bit, but I think what you really nailed is important. Leonard Hamilton's ability not only to maybe scrap his game plan halfway through, but just because this team is so versatile, because they're so deep, because they have so many different types of players, they can really pivot and they can change what they're doing mid-game for whatever team they're playing, whatever type of team they're playing. So I think that's something that's going to be super valuable come tournament time. So, I think that's something people should really keep an eye on with this team. But next thing I want to talk about, and I alluded to it earlier, was the foul calls we saw. There were some very questionable foul calls during this game. I believe, and I think a few other beat writers who cover this team were talking about this. Pitt in the past, this seemed like a real problem when Florida State has played Pitt. They haven't played well there in the Leonard Hamilton regime. What do you think about what was going on today? And do you think, if this is a home game, do you think it's as close as it was by the end? Because I think, while it was a 7-point game by the end of the game, if this is a home game for Florida State, it might be a double-digit game, and it might not even get down to those close free throws that we were seeing at the end.
Yeah, I think that you have a good point there. I don't know that it would be a huge dramatic swing if this was a home game against a road game, but there were definitely quite a few calls. I seem to remember a few against Sardar Calhoun in particular that I was just like, what is this? Especially, I mean, there was also a lot of just contested shots in this game. So I think that's where, I think you have the opportunity for some things to go either way, for a charge versus a block. And I mean, the refs aren't perfect. But I think, and what you say about Pitt being a problem for Florida State, the last time that FSU won at Pitt was 2014. Jameis Winston was a quarterback. And
yeah.
I don't know what it is when they go up there. I really don't. But it is, they really have issues with this kind of free throw offense sometimes that it seems like Pitt can benefit from. So overall, though, I think it might have been an issue, especially early on. We talked about that sloppiness that we saw, but I don't think it was, a game breaker like it could have been. And I think like we might have seen in previous games against Pitt.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Maybe not a game breaker, but I think if you went on Twitter,
still an impact. You're totally correct.
Oh yeah. Well, and I think if you go on Twitter and see how Florida State fans were reacting, they were not happy and they were not pleased what was going on during that game. But at the same time, I think I understood what you're saying. It was definitely not a great game breaker by any means, but I think in a lot of aspects, it probably frustrated this Florida State team at times, not being able to get into their rhythm.
Totally.
But something I wanted to talk about a little bit more next was some injury news we got after the game. So Coach Leonard Hamilton was speaking after the game, and the first thing he said was that MJ Walker only practiced 30 minutes this week, the entire week, and that he still felt like, with Balsa, with Anthony, they are still coming back and struggling with their own injuries. So can you talk a little bit about, all the news around MJ recently is that he's approaching 1,000 points. He's about 7 away. I know he was 24 away going into that Virginia game. So I was expecting him to try and go after that at some point. This seemed like the type of game where you're the leading scorer and the leader of your team is 7 points away from 1,000 points. It seems like, he's going to be playing a lot of minutes. You should try and get him enough buckets to get there. I know Leonard Hamilton probably doesn't think about that as much, but I think we saw MJ really affected by that today. While he did play a good game, though, even though he didn't score any points. He had a lot of good possessions, I feel like, and Leonard Hamilton was saying that too. He said he felt like his presence was felt on this game, whether it was defensively or his leadership or just communicating to all the players on the team and the energy he had on the bench. So can you talk about how affected you thought he was during this game? And not just him, but I also feel like Balsa really seemed to, maybe he didn't play as many minutes as he would have been playing in a normal game.
Yeah, I think definitely the quality of the minutes that was played, especially by Balsa, and then even though MJ was held without any points in this game, I think that defensively his impact. Pitt seemed to have a real issue finishing on a lot of their possessions today, and I think that especially him, guarding in the paint, I thought he did a solid job on quite a few possessions there. But yeah, I think this was probably, I would say these were some of the best minutes that I had seen Balsa play this year. Just in terms of, I think defensively and offensively, he seemed to find a way to get open. When somebody's kind of, boxed out outside of the paint, he found a way to get on the bucket really
I'm
good.
pretty sure Logan. Just you can keep going in a sec. I just want to say I think all of the points he scored today were off dunks.
Yeah.
I think maybe all of them, if not maybe just one basket.
I think he was done,
but
quite a bit. So yeah, I think that just to kind of be right on the basket, and kind of that option B, when it's like, okay, you got, you're getting double teamed on the key or something like that. So I think that yeah, I was really pleased with how he played, and I'm sure also that Pitt was wanting to really key in on Walker when he was kind of the main driving force with 17 points against Virginia.
Yeah.
So I think that, and I think it probably opened up RaiQuan Gray a little bit. And I mean, he's a very dynamic weapon. So I'm sure, Coach Han was like, okay, we can lock him down. We can move the ball around to some of these other guys. I thought RayQuan Evans as well had a solid bounce back game with a start after he was kind of left with a goose egg last game.
Yeah.
Scotty Barnes had a few highlight plays. I think that obviously having MJ, and I realize that's what your question was about. So but I think that he, even if he was left out of the scoring column, I think in just opening things up for other guys, and in terms of defensively, I think he still had a solid game.
Yeah, I think maybe while he didn't have all the highlight plays and the 3-pointers that he was having versus Virginia, I think he did play a good game in a lot of aspects. Defensively, I'm always very much impressed by Balsa because I think teams don't really key in on him as much as they should. Over and over, and you'll see it from all the centers on this team, but I think Balsa in particular has impressed me the most with his ability to switch onto smaller guards, and where he's in a super uncomfortable position where most centers would be, totally out of sync and totally thrown off their rhythm by that. But it doesn't seem to faze him at all. I mean, he seems even more comfortable when he's guarding guards at times.
Yeah. So, yeah, I thought this was one of by far his better games. Let me go back through the box score here. There was a couple other guys that I wanted to talk about. I think one of the players that we were fairly critical of, I think FSU's first half play, but I think somebody that had a solid first half was Willie Osborne. Just in terms of he was doing very well on offense. And I think that maybe Pitt adjusted their game plan to kind of, I think there was a lot of through this game. You look at just the changes made, and that's part of why, FSU was leading the majority of the game, and I think that's attributable in large part to its depth and just the quality of minutes that they got from their starters. But I think there was a lot of just little adjustments that were made coaching wise. For me, the most indicative one is in the second half, being able to lock down Champagne as well as Florida State was able to. And I think that Pitt probably made those adjustments as well. I think that's why after the first half was over. And so, but overall, I think he had a solid first half, and I think that we saw great, consistent play from the majority of the team.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think in a lot of ways they wear down Pitt. Pitt obviously doesn't have the depth of players that Florida State does on their roster, and being able to just throw different guys out there. So I think over time they just seem to wear out Pitt. To me, that's what seemed like happened a lot during this game. Something I wanted to talk about next, though, and someone who he set he broke another record for his career was RaiQuan Gray. RaiQuan Gray now has 8 straight games in double-digit points. He's taken over for this team. I don't know how to say it any other way. I think for a little bit there when Florida State had first come off their first break, I maybe didn't think it was fool's gold, but I feel like oh, maybe we won't see this for the rest of the season. They're going to put the ball in other people's hands. He won't get as many opportunities. But it seems like the further we've gotten from that point, the more they want to put the ball in Rayquan's hands. So can you talk?
Certainly, I'm sorry.
No, you're all good, Logan. Don't worry. I know we're having a little bit of a technical issues, so no worries, man. But I just wanted to say with Rayquan, I've been not just impressed by his growth, because I think we've talked about that before. He's just a much improved player, but the control he has over himself, over his body, his ability to use his weight to his advantage and be quick. I don't think that's something you saw from him last season. And I know it's been talked about a lot on broadcasts and everything, how much. And I think one of the broadcasters today was saying that he's 260 pounds last season, he's 260 pounds this season, but now it's all muscle.
It's a muscular 260. Yeah, absolutely right. And I think today we saw it as well against Virginia. I think he was really able to just kind of out muscle a lot of Pitt players today, and really I think that was fairly reflective of just how FSU won this game. It's like, even if they're not necessarily firing on all cylinders like they were against Virginia, you can kind of still out grind people, like they did, I think, today against Pitt. Just with the quality of the depth they had, I think Pitt was really the effects of them being worn down were apparent later on in the game. But no, RaiQuan Gray in particular, I was glad to see him eat once again. I think that he's a real force to be reckoned with, and I hope he comes back next year. I think he might, quite honestly, and that's going to be really just fantastic, I think, for this team. And I think he could really be, it's hard to say anybody's going to really take the reins or whatever in this offense, but I think he could be just, a real problem player that, he opens up everybody else in that regard too, if he does that.
Well, and I just want to touch on something you just said, which is that he could be coming back for another year. I think before this season, if you'd asked anyone, you would have said, "Oh, definitely 2 more years for Rayquan. He still needs some time." And I still think that's probably the case. I think he could really benefit from another year in this system, and especially if he's trying to go that pro route, which of course all these players want to. But I think he could really benefit from having another year under his belt, of having his body this muscular and being able to work at all the little things that he can get better at. I think if he's the type of player that we could see come out as one of the more complete players Florida State has had recently, at least in terms of his skill set and all the different things he's able to do and how versatile he is. But that kind of transitions into something else I wanted to talk about, and I'm glad you are bringing this up, is this team is really talented. This Florida State team has players all over their roster, and they have players who don't play as many minutes who are going to be really important players for years to come. But something I'm interested in, and something I wanted to ask you about, is how many future professional players do you feel like are on this team? Because I think there are some obvious choices, some obvious candidates, but the more I look up and down this roster, I think there's easily 5 players that you could say could potentially go to the pros, even more to me, maybe 6 or 7. So, what do you think about that? And what do you think about this topic? Because I think, just real quick before you start, obviously MJ Walker is going to be most likely leaving this year. That seems... I think it would be crazy for him to come back for another senior season. Because let's just put that out there. He does have the availability to, especially or with how everything's going with COVID, the players have an extra year. So he could do that if he wanted to, but I believe he's already graduated or he's about to, and it probably wouldn't make sense. So him, Scotty Barnes are definitely not going to be on this team next year. What other players could you see having a professional career?
That's what I was talking to Jay, and he, I think that there are guys like, gosh, I'm sorry, I was looking at the roster, and I could quite honestly see, we talk about MJ Walker and Barnes. I think those are the obvious answers. I could quite honestly see somebody like Willie Osborne going to the pros. I think if he, I think just he's a pretty well-rounded player. I think Gray, obviously, if he keeps playing at the level he is. And when I was talking to Jake about the question that you had asked me, I think that's kind of related to this in a way. You had asked me on Monday, do you think FSU has too many good players? And he kind of pointed out with players like Nate Jack or somebody this year, for example, who isn't getting good minutes, or not good minutes, I should say, but isn't getting many minutes. But it plays well with guys who are very dominant in one area, but could probably use some refinement. And I think that if the player development for some of those guys like him or, gosh, who else here?
A name I was thinking about,
even something like
which I think could be interesting. Too. Yeah, I was about to say just now, Logan, as you were saying that, Anthony Polite could be a really interesting case for the NBA. He's the type of guy you look at. He has, the skill set is there in a lot of ways. Maybe he's not the high-end athlete that some of these other players will be going into the league, but in terms of his skill set, what he can do, how comfortable he is working within a pro-style defense, and having a lot asked of him, his transition to the league could be more seamless than people would expect, at least in my eyes.
Yeah. I think that there are a lot of guys that I think the roadmap is there for, how much they might need to develop in order to come along, and I think it's pretty for some guys like, RaiQuan Gray. I think if you had asked this last year, it's like, oh, if he had kind of, maybe bulked up a little bit, or not bulked up, gotten a little bit more, just able to use his body in the way that he has this year. I think that, has really elevated his game significantly. And I think for some guys like him at this point last year, that kind of roadmap to get there is a little more transparent than for others. But I think you could make a case for quite a few guys on this roster, especially the ones that, are younger and are just kind of getting, show me minutes, if that makes sense. They're coming in later in games. And I think there's quite a few of them.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, if you look at this team up and down the roster, it's going to be hard to say now what's going to happen, like you were just saying, with Nate Jack, with all these other players who maybe don't get the minutes that they would be getting on other teams. We just don't know, and we won't know, and it's something that we just won't find out until we see it happen over time. So I think it'll be really interesting, not just to look back on how many players will be taken from this team to the pros, but when we look back on last year's team and other teams like that 3, 4, 5 years out, we look at all the players up and down the roster. That'll be really interesting to see, not just, the players that they have that year ago, but the depth of quality that they have front to, or from the top to the bottom on the roster. So, I think that's something that's going to be really interesting to look at.
Certainly, yeah. Forward. I think that kind of yeah, I'm sorry, Ben, I lost you for a sec there. But yeah, I think just kind of those depth guys, seeing them kind of move through, just like, okay, they're coming in on kind of that second unit before the Green Vipers practically. And then seeing, quite a few guys I think we've seen make that real extra step, even somebody like MJ Walker, who, he's been solid for his entire career, but I think this year especially he's kind of taken that extra step. Anthony Polite, I think has done that. Wyatt Wilkes as well has really kind of moved, moved up and really kind of, earned their pay in a sense, or earn their, maybe not pay, so we're talking about college basketball, but earn their, earn their spot on this team. I could see, I think that just for example, that really have a good lane to move through in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree with you a lot. It'll be over time. This will be something that'll be really interesting to look at, and something to go over. People love to go back and look at old pro drafts and see how the players pan out over time. I think it'll be really interesting to see the stretch that Leonard Hamilton's been on and look at all the teams and look how they pan out. That's enough talk about that for now. But something I wanted to finish on, and something I wanted to make our last topic today, something I'd thought a little bit about, and I've really seen many people talk about, is Florida State just beat the number 17 in the country. Of course, everyone's talking about that. That's not what I'm referring to. But this team has a few losses on their record. They lost to Clemson earlier in the season. UCF. There's some really frustrating games. Let me ask you this, Logan. How high do you think FSU could be in the latest poll that we're going to see on Monday? Because I think for Florida State fans, if you look at it, they're obviously going to be passing Virginia, especially with this, with the win at Pitt. Maybe if they drop that game, something else might have happened. But how high do you think we could see this team going? Oh,
yeah. I'm sorry, Ben. Can you just?
You know what? We're losing Logan. I'm gonna. He's having some technical difficulties, so I'm just gonna finish up here and talk a little bit more about what I was talking about earlier, which is how high should FSU be on the news ranking? Going into the UVA game, they were ranked number 16. They had the Virginia Tech game upcoming on their schedule. They had a lot to look forward to in terms of not just raising their stock, but being able to become the best team in the ACC. And for Florida State, maybe that end ranking, that number that number that they end up with at the end of the regular season won't matter as much to Leonard Hamilton. But it's going to be really interesting to see how the committee looks at a team that had so much time off, that had all the COVID pauses, and a team that really only struggled in a few certain spots. So it'll be a really interesting case study because, Florida State is a unique team in a lot of ways. And, one thing I also wanted to end on before I finish up here is Florida State and their ability going forward for the number 1 seed in the ACC. If you look at the rest of the schedule, Florida State has 4 more games remaining on their schedule. Virginia has 4 more games remaining on their schedule. Of course, Florida State has the win over Virginia. But if Florida State were to win out, they would clinch the number 1 seed if and only if Virginia loses 1 game. So, Florida State, they need to play well, and they need luck in order to get that number 1 seed in the ACC. But it's definitely something that's very viable for them. It is not out of the question by any means. Virginia doesn't really have any tough games left on the schedule. They don't have any games against ranked opponents. But no matter what, with the way things end for this team at the end of the season, one of these 2 teams is going to be the number 1 seed, and it'll be the 4th year in the row that this has happened. And it just goes to show how much Florida State has grown and how much the class of the ACC has changed and the top of this conference has changed. So we'll see how things end up for Florida State for the rest of the season. Like I was saying, they're going to need some luck, and they're going to need to win out in order to get that number 1 seed in the ACC. So, that will be something interesting for Florida State fans to look at, and as I end here, I just want to let everybody know that you can look forward to our post-game coverage of the Miami game on Wednesday, and Florida State fans should be checking Monday to see how high Florida State lands on the newest ranking in the poll. So have a great night, everyone. I hope you enjoyed our broadcast, and if you have any questions or anything like that, you can always put them in the comments, and we'll see. I'll see you next Wednesday. I hope you enjoyed this Florida State team, and have a good weekend.